And we're live. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Master the Real Estate Hustle. I'm Michael Coburn, and I'm super excited that you're here today. You're going to be so glad that you tuned in as we have Mr. Ralph Thomas, real estate investment consultant extraordinaire, going to be visiting with us today. But I just want to give you a quick heads up about what Master the Real Estate Hustle is, right? This is a place we come every week and we have a special guest, whether it's somebody like Ralph from the investment industry or from a title company or a product or service or something that helps the consumers and the real estate agent to get to know, understand, and learn about the real estate hustle that much better. So anyways, real quick, we're going to go ahead and get started as soon as we're done with this quick intro. So stay tuned, and we're going to be talking with Ralph Thomas. And we're back. Ralph, welcome to the show.
Hey, Michael. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Before we get started, let me just tell people a little bit about you. Ralph has been with RE/MAX Town & Country now for approximately 3.5, 4 years. He started real estate investing a little over 8 years ago. And since that time, he has built a personal portfolio of rental properties. And since becoming as a licensed agent, he's helped several residential and commercial clients buy, sell, and develop their passive income portfolios. Ralph is experienced in working with various wholesalers and finding flips, rentals for his clients as well as himself. Along the way, he's developed a strategy and created some awesome tools that have resulted in increased effectiveness and efficiency for both him and his clients. Ralph, that's a pretty big resume.
Thanks.
Welcome to the show. We're super excited. We're so glad to have you. Let's just go ahead and jump right in. I got a few questions I wrote down for you. So let's say I'm an investor client. What's one of the first conversations you would have with me?
Good question. Well, the first thing I need to do is help you understand, what your goals are. If you're a first-time investor client, you've probably watched hundreds of hours of HGTV and think you know it all. The reality is, well, there's some good information in there. It's not always the best place to learn. And so my first goal is for you is to understand, what are your goals? Is it a short-term goal? Is it a 3 to 5 year? Is it a 15 or 20 year prospect? Number one. Number two is, are you interested in building a passive income through rental properties? Or are you thinking about doing some quick money flips?
Excellent. Yep. That's probably one of the most important things is because everybody wants to be an investor. Everybody wants to buy investment property. And then you ask them, what are your goals? And they're like, well, that's a good question. I have no idea. What is my goal?
Right.
And I'll let you know.
Exactly. And most of them haven't thought about it. Again, they've just watched the TV programs thinking that all they have to do is go out here and buy the house and it all takes care of itself. And
that's like, no money down, no monthly payments. Everybody's just going to give you a house, right?
Right. And there's some basic questions like, do I pay cash for the house or should I leverage that? And, if I have $100,000, should I be looking to buy one house or maybe buy two houses, through mortgaging? So those are some questions that maybe they haven't thought of, but I have to, kind of sometimes pull it out of them. And,
absolutely. That brings up my next question, Ralph. So you basically have to educate those clients. How do you go about educating a client about things like that?
Well, a lot of it's just asking questions, and then finding out, what are their goals, and then helping them to realize that there is a process. This is not just a throw a dart at the dartboard and, I hope I hit a home run. Because unfortunately, what I find with the vast majority of investor clients, especially the first time, they look at it as a hobby. They're not looking at it as a real job, as the way it should be, or as a business, the way it should be. And so when they're looking at it as a hobby like that, then that's when mistakes can happen. And so the education, I tell them, look, there's 4 things that you have to realize, especially if you're going after a passive income, which would be rental properties. Number 1, you have to be thinking about cash flow. Okay, that's the number 1. Number 2, think about you're building equity in that home, even though you're not living in it. Number 3, I have to educate them on some tax advantages, because then I have to have a discussion with them. Are you thinking about doing an LLC or some other type of developing a tax entity that could save them money? And then the 4th and the least important is actually capital appreciation, and that happens when you sell the property. What I find when I talk with most investors is they have it reversed. Right. They think that the most important thing is capital appreciation. Well, that's true if you're going to be flipping, but if you're doing passive rental income, that's absolutely the least important of the 4 that I just mentioned. So, the other thing with education, I have to constantly remind them. In fact, with some clients I've worked with for several years, and I'm about ready sometimes to want to have to tattoo on their arm, this is a business, not a hobby. Right. And over here on this arm, take the emotion out, because I'm not going to live there.
Right. That's funny. So, well, you know what? We all have access to MLS and the internet, but it's not that easy to find these perfect properties. So how do you go about finding these investment opportunities for your clients?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so every once in a while you'll get lucky. I found a foreclosure here a few months ago for a client on the MLS. But most of the good properties, because again, it goes back to the HGTV, everybody, I mean, the prices have gone up so much, it's hard to find one at the right price.
Right.
So you can find one at an auction. You can go to the courthouse. I think it's the first Tuesday of every month, and sit out there with everybody else, and hopefully you get a winner. But you better bring a suitcase full of cash, because that's typically how you have to buy those. I've tried that in the beginning. It really was a waste of time in my particular model. So I have, over the last several years, developed relationships with several wholesalers. Mm-hmm. So I keep in contact with them, and I'll look at 3 or 4, sometimes a half a dozen properties every week online first, and see if it's something that either I might be interested in or one of my clients might be interested in. So wholesaling is still a great tool, because foreclosures, I think the last time I saw in Collin County, for example, foreclosures made up less than 1% of the transactions. So they're just not out there like they were 10 years ago.
Right. And no, it's funny that you say that, because I've had clients over the years, and we all do, right, in the real estate business. Hey, Michael, I want to buy a foreclosure. And I'm like, are you saying you want to buy a foreclosure, or are you just saying you want a really good deal on a house? Because once I explained to them what a foreclosure is, we got to go to the courthouse steps, right? And we're going to bid on these things sight unseen. If you see it, you've seen it from the outside. And if you didn't do your research, you may be buying a property with tax liens. And so you're buying this property at the courthouse, no inspections, no repairs, and then you're paying cash for this house. And when I tell them that, they're like, oh, no, I don't want that. And so I'm like, well, I think what you're referring to is an REO, which is a real estate owned by a bank. A bank may be foreclosed, went through the foreclosure process, pulled the property back, and now's got it on the market and typically selling for retail.
Exactly. And so, and some of what you said is still true, because even though you can do an inspection, you can go inside, unlike an auction, there's still a lot of hidden risk. And again, and that's what, going back to square one, when I'm talking with my investors and educating them, I have to find out, what is your threshold for pain? And they usually say, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, are you willing to put some money into this property? You may, if you're handy and you want to do it yourself, great. But you might have to put in $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 to get that property up to par, to get it remodeled, and to get it ready to be marketable as a rental, as a lease property. Or are you looking for something that's ready to go? And so those are some other questions that you have to make sure that you ask and understand the mindset and the willingness for that pain threshold for that investor client.
Absolutely, Ralph. Okay, so we talked about how you find these investment opportunities, but what process do you follow once you've identified the property for your clients, or identified a prospective property?
Well, if it's going through a wholesaler, typically it's going to be listed on the MLS more often than not. And so I'll begin my search there. I'll get all the details on the MLS. And as I'm pulling that, I'll do a CMA, because I want to, it's important to make sure that you acquire the property at the right price. That is an important part of the equation. And then after I do the CMA, then I'll also do a lease analysis to say, okay, if this house is at, ARV, which is after repair value, and is marketable, how much can I lease this property for? And then from there, what I've done, Michael, is I've developed a simple Excel worksheet. That's it right there. It's a simple one-pager. And so before I even go look at a property, I don't want to waste my time or my client's time running around looking at half a dozen properties. Right. So as I go into the research phase, I've developed this, and there's basically 4 sections. The first section that you see there where the red arrow is, you just plug in the property details, the square footage. You can play with the acquisition cost, versus the list price, things like that.
Sure.
Once I plug that in, then I go down into section 2. Section 2, you're going to plug in all of the related expenses. I even plug in a vacancy, because at some point after year 1, if you don't have a multiple lease, you've got to account for a period of time that property is going to be vacant. But I'll plug in everything associated with that, look at all of the expenses. This form, I can look at a single property, I can look at a duplex, all the way to a fourplex.
So you mentioned, let me cut in right there. You mentioned vacancy and credit loss. So, but I don't plan on keeping my property vacant, Ralph. I'm going to keep it leased out all the time. What do you mean vacancy?
Right. Well, it's great. I've been pretty fortunate when I work with my clients. I'm able to get tenants for them that are multi-year. That's not the norm. Usually a person comes in and they're going to rent for a year. Once they decide not to renew that lease and they move out, that property is going to be pretty much off the market for at least 30 days, because you got to go in, perhaps do some painting, some other repairs, clean it, get it ready, get it marketed, get it put back on the market, and then get it turned around. And the average is closer to 60 days. So as an investor, you have to be thinking about, well, guess what? Whether you've paid cash for that or whether you have a mortgage, there's still some carrying costs. And so you have to account for that as part of your operating from year to year.
Great point, Ralph. Great point. That's probably one of the things right there. It's the most left out number for most amateur investors.
Yeah, and I tried to account for everything from HOA fees to landscaping, if that's appropriate, property taxes, of course, any of those expense type items. And then if you go down to the 3rd section of this document, this is what I call the investment or the debt. So typically, what I try to encourage my investors to do is don't pay cash. Most lenders, they're going to tell you have to put down a 25% down payment. And then I just plug into my mortgage calculator, okay, this is your amount each month for principal, for equity, calculate that on an annual basis, okay? And then that's going to be subtracted out from your net operating profit. So that's kind of what I call the investment and debt piece of it. And then the 4th section is really kind of the nuts and bolts. And as a real estate investor, you're really going to be focused on 3 metrics. The first one is your cap rate or capitalization rate. The second one is your gross multiplier, gross rent multiplier, GRM. And then, of course, last and most important is your cash to cash. And so this is kind of where the rubber hits the road. And so what I do, again, it takes me, after I've done all the research through the MLS, it takes me about 15 minutes to plug this information in. And then knowing what my goals are for a particular investor, or if it's for myself, there's certain thresholds. And so, again, going back and really knowing your investor, asking the questions, then you're going to be able to know right up front, is this going to be a property that they would be interested in looking at? And if the numbers work, because remember, you have to take out all of the emotion. This is not a hobby. You're not going to live there. So if the numbers don't work, you move on and you find the next one. If the numbers do work, then it's like, great. Okay, I'll set up an appointment. Let's go look at it, and then let the fun and the negotiation process begin.
So you just said something that just hit me. You said it's not an emotional, it's a logical decision. And so it sounded like from what you just said, you do this work and see if the numbers work before you even go look at the property.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's fantastic. What number are we looking for, Ralph? What interest rate are you looking for typically on personal property or the average investor? What's a good rate of return or cash on cash return?
Yeah, it's going to vary from individual, depending upon their risk. I'm a little bit more aggressive, and so I look at there are many ways for me to invest my money, whether it's in real estate or whether it's in the stock market and different things. It also depends on the individual property. Real estate, it's still all about location, location, location. I typically like to have a target cash on cash of at least 8%. And because again, and if you have a riskier property in a neighborhood that might be not as developed as some, then maybe that risk might carry a 10 or 12% rate of return. So
perfect, excellent answer, Ralph. Thank you very much on that. I want to move right along. I got a couple other questions here. So once a transaction has been completed, right, you've got this relationship with the investor client. How do we leverage that relationship?
Right. Well, I think from my experience, the process that I've used has really surprised a lot of my investors. And so one way to leverage that is to, one, have a process, two, be willing to educate them. And it's a continual process on the education, because people forget, they're not doing this full time. They're usually working a 9-to-5 job.
Right.
So, keeping communication open. And then the other thing too, what I find is that once I get a tenant in there, the way I continue to leverage it is I'll help them find a tenant, because it's easy to go find a house sometimes, to get it ready. And typically I've come across investors who say, well, I did this 5 or 10 years ago and I had a really bad tenant. Well, part of the process is they probably didn't have a good screening system set up. When they tell me what their requirements are for a rental property, if they allow pets, for example, and they might say, well, we'll allow one dog of 50 pounds. Well, actually, when I find a tenant, I actually take my scale and I go weigh the dog.
That's awesome.
I'm just kidding about that, but I do I do want to meet the dog, and because sometimes people are saying, well, a Great Dane, I'm sorry, they don't weigh 50 pounds.
Right.
Right.
But Mastiff is a small one.
Right. And then right, if it's a puppy like 2 months old, but the other way to leverage them then too is through the tenants, right? Because what I find is that then if I treat the tenants really good for however long they're renting from my investor client, one day I hope that they're going to pick up the phone and call me and say, well, I'm tired of renting, I need to go buy a house. And so for me, it also becomes kind of a bench strength, you might say, for what I call the retail side of selling real estate. So it's really kind of a full circle compliment. And then once my investors have a good experience, and I have a lot of first-time investors. I've got one that I'm educating right now. And it's what I tell them, look, the first time you do something, that's the hardest.
It's scary.
It's scary. It's the unknown. And so what I try to do is walk with them hand in hand, slay the dragons with them, be there, answer any questions. And then once we get one under our belt, it's so much easier to leverage that positive experience into a second, third, or fourth property.
And that's the thing, right, Ralph? I mean, you got to do it right the very first time. And that's the mistake a lot of people do. They just jump right in. They watched an HGTV show. They just jumped in, bought a property, bought the wrong property. The numbers didn't work out. They had a horrible tenant, and they have a horrible experience. And they go, I hate rental properties. I hate investment properties. Yep. I'm done.
Yeah.
And so that the first one is the absolute most important, which is why I sure wish I had you around when I did my first real estate transaction.
Well, I tell you what, I wish I would have started this years and years earlier. I remember as a kid growing up, my dad told me, and of course, when you're growing up, you don't think your parents know anything. But he told me, he says, people, make cars and boats and houses and build stuff. He says, but you know what? They're not making any more land. And it didn't strike me until I got older. And then you get wrapped up into, well, I'm working a 9-to-5 job. You got a family, you're raising kids, whatever the case may be. Sure. And it's like, the next thing you know, the time has gone by. But I firmly believe, and this is one of the things that I try to educate my investor clients and anybody who's even thinking about it, is if you want to diversify your income, if you want to build real wealth, you've got to look at real estate.
Have to.
You've got to look at real estate, and even, and rentals is a great way to do it. This is a great market. It's a great time. Interest rates are low. And I think with the economy, the rental market's going to continue to grow.
One of the things I always talk to my agents or our agents about, whenever you come across one of your past clients, let's say they have a baby, right? Little Billy is born. Yep. It's a great time to call the clients and go, hey, have you thought about a college fund for little Billy? And they're like, well, what do you mean, Michael? Well, I need to come by and talk to you guys about a very easy way for you to save for little Billy's college fund. And that is buying a property, right? You put it in a 15-year note. By the time little Billy's ready to go to college, you own a house paid off. You can either flip it out, buy 4 more houses, and you've got cash flow, or you can just take the cash every month to keep his college paid for.
And it's funny you mentioned that. I helped a client do that just a couple of years ago. They had a condo in Dallas. Their son was growing up and was moving, I forget where now, but anyway, it was here in Texas. And so we sold their property. Then I helped them do a 1031 exchange. And so that 1031 exchange allowed them to defer all of their profit from that condo. And they actually bought a house in the college town where their son was going to school, and he lived in it for free. And then, of course, when he gets out of school, they'll probably sell it. So that was a good way of, using some other instruments within the investment property to continue to build and maintain your wealth.
That's fantastic. So let me ask you a question. Do you work only with residential investors, or do you work with any commercial investors as well?
Well, actually, it's funny you mentioned that. About a year ago, I started working with commercial as well. And so right now I have as many commercial investor clients as I do on the residential. And one of my clients just literally called me a couple of days ago and said that her brother's coming into town and noticed that there's a Days Inn motel that he's interested in buying. So right now I'm beginning the research process on that to get the information, have a meeting with him next week and see if we can put something together. I mean, that would be by far my largest commercial endeavor, but I am working with and have worked with several doctors and doing several medical complexes here in the last 12, 18 months.
That's absolutely fantastic. Okay, Ralph, you're probably not going to want to answer this question, but I got to ask it. Over the years, right, what mistakes have you made as an investor or made while working for an investor? Right.
Well, the biggest one was not starting soon enough. Like I said, I wish I would have started this, 15 or 20 years ago. Other than that, and I watched my fair share of HDTVs.
Right.
And so I do believe that a lot of times the best way to learn is by making mistakes. I try to be cognizant of those mistakes and not repeat them. But I think the first mistake, the biggest one I made, was I went and I bought 2 properties in the same week. And so I really kind of bit off more than I could chew. And I'm pretty handy. And so I thought, well, both of these properties need some work, but I didn't understand the carrying cost concept the way I should have. And so because I had 2 properties that I had purchased the same week, they both needed to be worked on, and it was just me. It took me longer to bring them to market than what I would have liked. So
that's back on your profit, right?
Well, exactly. And so I was a little stubborn because I was building my team. I didn't have a plumber, electrician, handyman, and so over the years, I've built a team of individuals in these various trade disciplines. Now that, I don't have the time to go do it. I thought I did when
that's priceless.
And that is. And so I have to depend on other people. So you have to realize to do that.
And so if you have to depend on other people, you better have a good team.
You have to have a good team. And it's taken me quite a while. I've gone through several, and if you say you're going to do something and you don't show up, second time you're gone. I'll go find somebody else. So
absolutely.
But I'm really happy that I've got a really good team of individuals from roofers to landscapers to everything in between.
Ralph, I've been in this business for 32 years, and I worked with very, very few investors, but I've sold a ton of property to mom and pop buyer seller. What is it that you love so much about working with investor clients?
Yeah. Well, I like to see the success. I like to see the joy on their face. When we've gone through that process of purchasing that property, maybe you do a little bit of work, maybe not, it depends. And then getting that first tenant in there, and then, just working with them, knowing that it's going to be the foundation, or it's going to add that foundation to their growth development and their wealth development. And so, the transaction is nice, but for me, it's more about helping that individual, helping that family continue to build their wealth through adding real estate and helping manage them through that process.
Absolutely. Ralph, I've got a couple more questions for you, and I know you're busy. We'll let you go. But what would you say to somebody out there who wanted to get into an investing? They're not in the real estate business, but they want to try to their hand at investment properties. Where can they reach you at, or what would you say to them to?
Yeah. Well, first I would say pick up the phone and call me. No, but I've read some books. I've gone to seminars. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm a firm believer, and I like to try to think of myself as a sponge. I'm certainly not a know-it-all. I've got more to learn, and I'm continuing to take in new information. And so I would tell somebody, get a lot of it's personality too. Find somebody that you can work with. Find somebody who's willing to share that information to educate you along the way. But you also got to find somebody who's going to be willing to say, stop, you're making the wrong decision here. Now, at the end of the day, it's their money, it's their decision. So you've got to find the right realtor, the right investment consultant that's going to help guide you away through that process.
Absolutely. So now I know we have a lot of real estate agents on this call as well. What would you say to some of the real estate agents out there, the real estate professionals that wanted to get into the investment aspect of the business, because they're two total separate types of business, right? It's a different branch.
Right. I would say do it, because and don't hesitate. The other reason why I jumped into it is, one, I was already an investor myself. And so that made that transition a little bit easier. But as I was, looking at building my real estate business, to me, it's just another leg on the stool, so it provides another income stream.
Absolutely.
It's a different type of work, but it's something that I enjoy, and gives me an opportunity to continually work with that same investor time and time again. So it's not a one and done, or I'll see you in 7 years, when you're ready to sell
Right.
and move on. So, but I would just say, look at it as another income stream that will help add stability and take your business to the next level.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Ralph, thank you very much. I want to just real quick say to everybody out there, if you've got a question really quick, like in the next 10 seconds, be typing that in, and I'll get Ralph to answer it. If not, you can reach back out to Ralph at RE/MAX Town & Country. And Ralph, what is your telephone number they can reach you at if they need?
So my telephone number is 214-316-7109.
7109. That's awesome. Thank you guys, or thank you very much, Ralph, for being here today. And everybody that's watching right now, thank you very much for watching. I hope this has helped you master the real estate hustle, and it's helped you to become a better consumer or a better real estate broker, real estate agent, professional. Thanks for watching. Tune in again next Tuesday at 1:30. We're on every week. We're always proud to bring great professionals to you guys like Ralph Thomas. Thanks again, Ralph.
Thanks, Michael.